Hello everybody, my name is Patrick O'Brien. My system research project has to do with fossil fuel drilling on BLM land. For the purpose of this project, most of the information given will be about the state of Colorado. First of all, I would like to give an overview of BLM land and what type of drilling activity is occurring on this land. The BLM, or the Bureau of Land Management, is responsible for managing 264 million acres in the United States. Of this 264 million acres, 90% is open to oil and gas leasing development. This leaves only 10% open exclusively to all other stakeholders. This would include hikers, hunters, anglers, campers, and perhaps most importantly, the wildlife that call these habitats home. The nature of fossil fuel development practices is harmful to the environment by being destructive to the landscape, as well as contributing to climate change by increasing the amount of CO2 and methane that enters the atmosphere. In fact, over the past 3 years, usage of these lands by the oil and gas industries produced as much as 5.9 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases. That's more than half the emissions that China releases per year. So the question that must be asked is, are there alternatives to oil and gas drilling on public lands? And would these alternatives provide enough energy and have a positive effect on the environment high enough to justify the cost of replacing fossil fuel extraction? Like I mentioned before, this presentation will mostly be Colorado specific. In Colorado, there are 4,712 leases given by the BLM to fossil fuel companies. These leases total 3.7 million acres. These leases have also produced 6.6 million barrels of oil and 646 million cubic feet of natural gas. Both of these numbers fall within the top 10 in the nation. Fossil fuel extraction from all federal public lands accounts for about 25% of total carbon dioxide emissions. The state of Colorado is responsible for 4% of that total, as well as 6.5% of total U.S. methane emissions. The drilling leases that were issued in 2019 could increase carbon dioxide emissions by 184 million metric tons, which would be the equivalent of adding 39 million passenger cars to the roads for a year. In Colorado, 60% of the electricity is powered by coal and 22% is powered by natural gas. This is unfortunate because Colorado enjoys 300 days of sunshine per year and above average wind speeds compared to the rest of the nation. As you can see, fossil fuels dominate Colorado's energy consumption. Coal and natural gas outweigh all alternative energy sources, and it's not even close. Currently, Colorado's goal is to run on 100% renewable energy by the year 2040. In order for this to happen, oil and gas leases that occur on public lands will have to be gone or transitioned into alternative energy sites. The transition of these sites would be a positive one because it would take infrastructure that is already being used and replace it with an alternative that would not release destructive CO2 or methane into the atmosphere. The federal lands in Colorado and across the country hold a tremendous potential for unleashing the power that alternative energy possesses. However, currently only 5% of the U.S. is powered by alternative energies. In Colorado's case, 3% of energy comes from solar and 18% comes from wind. These numbers could easily increase due to the fact that 36% of Colorado land is public. This diagram shows a typical fossil fuel flow with the added intervention of replacing existing sites with alternative energy and the positive effects this intervention could have. A potential downside to this proposal would be cost, and if this cost of transitioning renewable energy on public lands would outweigh the benefit they would provide. It turns out this transition could actually save money over time. If just the coal plants in Colorado were shut down, the savings would be around $2.5 billion. This money could go straight into renewable energy projects such as this one. These savings would continue to add up over time, as it is cheaper to fuel a car with electricity compared to gas or diesel, and it's less expensive to heat a building with an electric heat pump than burning natural gas. Utilizing public lands in order to make the transition from fossil fuels to alternative energy would be the right thing to do for the environment and the economy. The drawbacks of these alternative energy sites are that they take up large tracts of land. This would present similar problems to the existing fossil fuel infrastructure that is already there. The difference would be the amount of CO2 emissions produced. Almost 1/4 of CO2 emissions come from fossil fuel production on public lands. This production could be replaced by alternative energy sites that would go a long way in cutting carbon emissions. The fact that alternative energy could cut this amount of emissions is reason enough of why they should replace production of fossil fuels. Replacing fossil fuels with alternative energy sites would take time, however, it is a process that should begin. One way to start this process is to cease giving new public land access to oil and gas corporations. Over the past 4 years, the federal government has offered up 461 million acres to these corporations. These lands and leases could be going to alternative energy instead. The mission of the BLM is to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of public lands for the use and enjoyment of present and future generations. However, with the amount of oil and gas drilling being conducted on BLM land, the organization's mission is not being met. As I mentioned before, there are a number of stakeholders that utilize this land, and all of them should be considered when evaluating how this land should be used. In conclusion, we have discovered what BLM land is and what type of drilling activity is occurring on these lands. It was found that the impact is having a negative effect on the environment by the amount of carbon dioxide and methane that is being released into the atmosphere, as well as the destructive nature that these practices have. There are alternatives that can be used in place of these practices that would not only be beneficial to the environment, but could also save money in the long term. From my perspective, it is the responsibility of the federal government and the Bureau of Land Management to do what is best for these lands and the people and wildlife that use them. I would argue that transitioning to alternative energy would be moving in the direction of accomplishing this goal. Thank you everybody for watching, and I look forward to everybody else's presentations.